The story begins in a dimly lit, vibrant cave where multiple people were getting attacked by a flower-type monster, which is straight up from a zombie movie. It was a group of 4 friends who were talking to each other about how the raid monster was too dangerous, and the raid was way too hardcore. One of them was so dumb that, even when he was fighting, he was having a phone in his hand to record everything and get enough views. They had already called out for reinforcements, but they were not coming, and now, they were seriously in a fix. Just then, someone opened a heavy book and told them to step back. As they turned around, they saw that the monster was getting penetrated by multiple rocky spikes while it was screaming in pain and agony. The friends immediately recognized the man, and the streamer asked the viewers if they could see him too, because the man who came to save them was none other than the hunter of hunters named Shen. He had a 100% record of succeeding in every dungeon raid he had ever done, making him the strongest. But the twist is that the story is not his, but instead, it is about his trashy son who was an unranked, pathetic, wannabe hunter. The son who was getting annoyed by the fact that his father was saving lives and hadn't even come to his graduation ceremony. The boy was named Shen. One of his friends asked him if he was alone and if his parents did not come. Shen started thinking of an excuse and just told his friend that they were busy. But then, his friend poured oil into the fire as he asked Shen to click his photo along with his parents. Even when Shen was ready to do it, he was deeply frustrated from inside, thinking that his dad is always busy. As the scene shifts, we see that the boy had come home and looked at his mom. And we come to know that his mom was also busy looking after his sister, who had been in a coma for the past 12 years. Shen was so shameless and dumb at that time that he asked his mom why she did not come to his graduation. But the lady was suddenly nervous, telling him that he already knows the reason why. "It happens, if I don't keep looking for her body, then who will?" she said. But hearing that, Shen started getting angry at his mom. It was just for one day. He was not able to understand why his mom only cared about her daughter and not her son. But suddenly, Shen came behind Shen. Looking at his dad, Shen was suddenly silent. His father told him that he was loud and asked him why he was raising his voice against his mom when he had been warned again and again not to do so. Knowing that Shen cannot throw tantrums in front of his dad, he started going away. And when the man asked his son where he was going, he just replied that he was going to the training hall. The father immediately became serious, telling him that his training was over. He should not do it anymore, because he cannot become a hunter with the kind of talent that he has. His father just wanted him to give up on being one and live a normal life. But this frustrated Shen even more, because all he wanted to do was to become a hunter. As the scene shifts, we see that Shen had come to the training hall, where he was training with some wooden swords. An instructor named Lee, who was also an active hunter and the owner of the training hall, was watching. Lee immediately realized from Shen's strikes that he was in a pretty intense mood. He wanted to know what had happened, but kept quiet and just kept fighting with the boy. Shen swung his wooden sword, making Shen deliberately take distance from him. But suddenly, the boy started using his hidden talent. His hand started glowing with a blue aura, as multiple chains started erupting from it. Lee was shocked, while Shen immediately grabbed the trainer's wooden sword with his chain, thinking that he had finally got him. But just when Shen was trying to pull the chains, Lee used a little bit of his power, and effortlessly broke the sturdy-looking chain. Shen was shocked, while Lee immediately came closer to the boy and smacked him on the ground. After a while, when Shen became conscious once again, the trainer told him that his attacks would have worked this time if his chains were not so damn weak. Lee just suggested Shen not use his power and come at him with his raw strength because his chains were useless. Hearing this was frustrating for Shen because he had known it all along. As the scene shifts, we see that both the teacher and student had come to a diner, where Lee asked Shen not to be angry because he was even treating him to black bean noodles when he did not have enough money. But Shen had a calm look on his face while telling his teacher that it was not feeling great for him to eat at the expense of someone who was not having money himself. This was a nail onto the trainer's heart, as he told Shen that he was still the owner of the gym and earned money. But Shen ignored him, instead, asking him to practice one more time. Lee was shocked, not able to comprehend how Shen was having this much energy, telling him that he was going to get diarrhea if he continued because, according to him, as Shen's Hunter Academy entrance exam was already over, he should just take a break until he gets the result. But suddenly, Shen screamed, disagreeing with his teacher while telling him that the other competitors have multiple abilities or are returnees, and they have so much power that they shoot fire and break walls. On the other hand, Shen was just someone with dumb and weak chains, and if he cannot train continuously, then there was no way that he could become a hunter. If he wanted his dad to acknowledge him, then he could not just keep resting at home when he was already so weak. but Lee became serious, telling Shen that he was weak due to the same reason, because his home and family should be the place where he should be the most at peace, but if his home is no longer comfortable, then he does not have anywhere to rely on when he was having a hard time. As the scene shifts, we see that Shen was coming out of the diner, but a group of middle-aged protesters were standing in the rain, wearing raincoats and telling everyone that it has been 100 years since the monsters showed up, and it had been decades since monsters started entering their world disguising themselves as humans. They have claimed to be the Roars who came back from another world and are deceiving the humans by saying that they were humans to begin with, but there was no evidence to prove that. And the protesters were a group that thought they were actually monsters who took the form of humans so that they could show their true form when it was high time. The protesters were against all of this, and wanted all the returnees to go back to where they came from because Earth was not their home. Hearing that, Shen got a memory trigger, and he thought that the protester was telling Shen to go back to the hell he had come from. Suddenly, a notification came to his phone, which fueled his anger even more. It told him that due to the overwhelming number of applicants, he had not been accepted to the 2026 admission for the Hunter Academy, and that he should try again next year. Shen's mind was going madly blank. The words, "go back to hell," kept ringing inside. He remembered that Lee told him that when things get really rough, he had nowhere left to run, because of his mental condition. Shen threw his phone away and immediately started screaming, telling everyone that the place he was in was already hell, and now he cannot go to an even worse place, even when he wanted to. He thought that everyone wanted to get rid of him, because he was weak and pathetic, but after his tantrum was over, he was just sitting down onto the stairs of the diner, wondering about what he should do with his life. Suddenly, his phone started ringing, and it was his mom. Even when he decided not to pick up the phone, he still did it, and asked his mom about what the matter was, but the news was so shocking that the scene shifts into the hospital, where Shen came running, while also crying, because the news was so shocking. He saw that his sister, who had been in a coma for 12 years, was back, and her condition was really good according to the doctor. He saw that his mother was crying while calling out to him and telling him to say hi to his sister, who was finally back. The girl was not having any expressions, and was still wondering about where she was, but her mother told Shen that, as his sister was feeling anxious, he had to be by her side as a family member. The lady wanted Shen to take turns with her and take care of his sister, but Shen was getting frustrated, telling her that he had a lot to do, and just because he graduated now does not mean that he had suddenly got some free time. The mother was really frightened while she told her angry son that she was his sister, and he should be a good brother. But for Shen, he does not even remember talking to her because he was so small. Hearing these harsh words, Shen's father immediately told him to watch his mouth. But now, Shen was angry at him too, telling him that he was not in the position to say that because he did not even care about his own son. But to everyone's surprise, the whole commotion fell silent as the girl started speaking, telling them that she does not like what was happening. Everyone turned around, looking at her, noticing that she was crying, and it was then that we come to know that the girl was named Soi. As soon as Shen heard his sister, it was like something had triggered inside of him, and after that, he started spending about 3 days a week at the hospital. Their mom seemed to think that they were getting closer while spending more time, but Shen was just keeping a watch on his sister and was doing his own things, while his sister was really sad, looking at his behavior. But we see that even after the day of the Academy's rejection, Shen had not stopped training, but when it was time for him to come and look after his sister once again, he came inside the emergency room and saw that the window was open and his sister was nowhere to be found. This shocked Shen to the core, as he knew that his sister was not in the condition to walk properly. As the scene shifts, we see that the girl was sitting on a bench near the hospital grounds, and Shen patted her back, scaring her, asking her why she left without telling him. Shen was really frustrated, because he had been looking for Soi everywhere, but still couldn't find her. The girl was flustered, telling Shen that it was really feeling suffocating inside the hospital room, so she decided to come outside. She asked her brother if she could stay outside for a bit longer, and hearing that, Shen also sat down and started fidgeting with his phone instead of talking to the girl. Looking at him once again, she realized that she would have to initiate the conversation herself, and asked him if he had hated his sister. This caught Shen off guard, and he wondered about what the girl was talking about. But according to Soi, Shen was really scary now, and he was looking more like their dad, when he used to be cuter. But Shen was not getting affected by it, because he knew that his sister was talking about the time when he was only 5 years old, and he does not even remember anything about it. And the girl took this point telling Shen that for her, mom and dad are older, and all her friends have even changed their numbers, and because of her age now, she can't even go to school, and it was suddenly feeling like she was all alone in this world, with no one to care for her. Hearing these words moved something inside Shen's heart. Because he had been alone for his whole life too, even when he was suffering. He told his sister not to worry, because she had got her mom, dad, and him. He explained to his sister that even when she does not have friends right now, she can still make new ones. And just because he cannot go to school, doesn't mean she can't. But these words had a mysterious effect on him. As soon as they came out of his mouth, he also realized that going to the Hunter Academy was not the only way to become a hunter, because even his instructor, Lee, had never gone to a proper school, still an active hunter. Shen realized that it was too early for him to give up, but his train of thought was suddenly stopped by the girl, who thanked him and asked if they should go back to the hospital room. Only after hearing these words did Shen realize that, even without her wheelchair, So-I had gotten out of the hospital room and was sitting outside. He was not able to comprehend how this had happened, but as soon as the boy turned around and looked at his sister, she was flying in the sky, while multiple cute stars surrounded her, and her eyes changed color. A big star appeared in both of them. Shen screamed, wondering how his sister was doing it, and the girl started explaining that while she was asleep, she went to the fairy realm and learned flying over there. But Shen was not happy. Instead, a horrifying expression struck his face, because he remembered the words of the protester, as he realized that his sister was a rur. According to the protester, his sister was really dangerous and not human, and according to his father, he was not a capable hunter without any kind of talent, so he could not stop her. Now, Shen was in a dilemma, wondering if he should believe the protesters and report his sister, or if he should believe his dad and do nothing. As the girl was flying toward the hospital room, Shen's face was frozen in horror. He had no idea what to do, what was the right thing. But suddenly, Shen and his sister were having a flashback. A much younger version of their mother stood in shock, seeing both Shen and Soi completely covered in dirt. But Shen, having an innocent and oblivious face, just told his mother that they were playing in the dirt, and Soi, with an annoyed expression, insisted that they were not dirty, they were just making sandcastles. Realizing there was no point in arguing, the lady sighed and told both of them to go inside the house and take a shower first. She asked them if they were hungry, but Shen, too excited, said he was not hungry at all. Instead, he turned to his sister. "I want to play more." So he promised that they would play again tomorrow. Then, hand in hand, they started heading home with their mother. But the girl did not even know that everything was going to change, because all creatures, humans and beyond, always believe that their life will go smoothly, that their future is certain. But for everyone, the future is uncharted territory, and nothing will go as planned. So I looked back at the park one last time, before finally heading toward their house. As the scene shifts, we see that Shen and the others lived in one of the flats in an apartment complex. Their mother cleaned both of them up. They had a delicious dinner, and finally, it was time to sleep. Shen was already asleep, while finally, Soi decided to go to sleep too. She wondered what they should play tomorrow, but she did not know that there would be no tomorrow, because suddenly, inside her dreams, a fairy appeared, introducing herself, and telling Soi that she had been chosen by their world. Looking at the cute little fairy, the girl was mesmerized. Then, the creature asked her, "Would you like to go and save the world with me?" And as she was still just a child, so I saw no harm in doing so. She spent 6 months in the fairy world before coming back. However, when she returned to her original world, a whopping 12 years had passed, and she was now an adult. As the scene shifts back to the present, multiple high-ranking officials enter the hospital room, telling both the lady and her daughter that she was indeed a returnee. One of the high-ranking officials, a man wearing glasses, stepped forward. He looked at Soi. "You were given a bracelet that was supposed to seal the abilities of awakeners, but the bracelet does not affect any rur." And as Soi's powers were still working, it was proof that she was indeed one of them. The man then asked Soi what the fairies did in the other world, and the girl started explaining. The fairies first introduced her to a few things: what she should not do in the fairy world, how she should use magic, and the knowledge she needed to survive in the other world. But the most important thing was for her to learn how to survive, from the queen. The man was shocked, wondering who the queen was, and the girl explained that the queen was an extremely bad person. So, the fairies told her that if she could give the queen a good scolding, Then she could go home. And this took her only 6 months. The man immediately interrupted the girl, assuming that SOI had returned to her world after killing the queen. But this made the girl sweat as she tried to explain again and again that she had just talked to the queen and somehow resolved the matter. She didn't even learn any dangerous magic because she wanted to be peaceful. But before the girl could even finish, the man cut her off again. He told her that, still, Ori's ability was dangerous. All returnees were strong individuals who had saved the other world and then returned to Earth. Meanwhile, Shen stood near the hospital door, listening to everything. The man continued, explaining that SOI's power exceeded that of an S-class hunter on Earth. He further clarified that, no matter how safe her ability had been in the other world, its nature changed when Aurori returned to Earth. For this reason, she was not allowed to use magic or any of her abilities if she wanted to stay with her parents. Suddenly, SOI noticed Shen standing in the hospital room, but before she could say anything, he turned and started walking away. Meanwhile, the man continued, stating that the next day, a hunter from the bureau would come to watch SOI for a few days to make sure she wouldn't use any of her abilities. Once again, Shen was neglected. As he slowly walked toward a chair, his mind was somewhere else. He had just returned from his awakening exam and now, he was checking his results. His smartphone screen displayed the truth. His physical abilities were certainly up to par, but he was not suitable for fighting monsters. And when it came to his actual ability, its strength and durability were weaker than an actual chain. There were no special abilities embedded within it, making its performance completely inferior to an actual weapon. Based on these facts, the appraisal community had decided to place Shen into F class, the lowest of the low. The boy shattered from the inside. He sat, completely still on the bench, his mind numb. But then, suddenly, SOI appeared in front of him, smiling. She thought maybe he was just shocked and now feared her because of her immense powers and their sudden increase. So, she told her brother there was no need to be afraid because nothing had changed. She was still the same, but Shen was so dumb. Instead of talking to her, he told her to go away. At first, SOI couldn't understand what she had done wrong, but Shen repeated himself, "Go away," because he wanted to be alone. On the other hand, SOI began blaming herself. Maybe everything was happening because of her powers. She wanted to tell Shen, "Don't be afraid of me," but Shen was so dumb that he screamed at her, telling her to go away, without even listening to what she had to say. Even though the girl looked like an adult, she was still just a child inside, and she was petrified after hearing such an angry scream. Shen didn't stay. He walked away. He didn't even look back. As the scene shifts, we see Shen walking through a crowd. His mind was heavy. He thought about what he had done and realized that he was just a pathetic little human being. But suddenly, he noticed something. Why was the place so crowded? He looked around, and then, in the distance, he saw his father, standing with someone else. Time passed. The scene shifted. It was night, and SOI was waiting for her brother to return. But he never came back. And as time passed, the suffocating feeling in the room grew stronger. She thought about her brother from before, the one who was cute and kind. Unlike the one she saw now, it was as if the girl would almost cry. And she decided to use her power anyway and started looking for something. She was gleaming with a fairy aura, and her eyes changed once again while she landed in a place none other than the old park where they used to play. But now, it was completely decimated. The lady wondered what had happened to it as multiple trees had grown over the place, and all the rides and slides were destroyed. Even though the place was the same, the girl found nothing familiar about it. She started remembering her old memories, just wanting to go back to the time when everyone was happy. As we come back from the memories, we see that SOI was crying profusely, longing to return to the past. But she knew that, even with magic and all sorts of powers, she could not turn back time. Suddenly, she sensed two people standing behind her. Turning around, she asked them who they were. They appeared to be innocent-looking and seemed to have no ill intentions. Instead of answering her question, they told her to calm down and asked her who she was. They asked if she was lost and unaware of where she was going, explaining that the park had been closed due to a dungeon break a few years ago. It was dangerous for ordinary people to loiter around because of the lingering energy that might still attract monsters. If that was the case, the girl wondered what these men were doing there. However, they refused to answer and instead asked if she was an outsider, offering to escort her out of the park and take her home. SOI hesitated, stepping back as the men moved closer. She assured them that she remembered the way and could leave on her own. But suddenly, to her surprise, one of the men appeared behind her and smacked her on the head with a baseball bat. The impact gave her a concussion, and she collapsed to the ground. It was then revealed that these 3 people were a gang of criminals who had targeted her, planning to extort her and do terrible things. The man with the bat started arguing that since he was the one who got the girl, she belonged to him, but the other 2 pointed out that he had hit her too hard, so hard that she had died. As they started getting into an argument over who deserved the bigger share, SOI suddenly began waking up, confused about what had happened. All 3 men were shocked to see her standing after taking such a heavy blow to the head. Even though she looked like an adult, she was still a child inside, unable to understand why a complete stranger had attacked her. The girl's expression showed pure shock, while the men began laughing. If she was alive, that only meant they could get even more money. However, the man with the bat remained stunned, finding it strange that she was still alive after being hit so hard. The other 2 scolded him, telling him to at least finish the job properly without messing up. Meanwhile, SOI was still struggling to comprehend why a random stranger had assaulted her. After some discussion, the trio decided that her survival was actually better. It meant they could extort even more money. As they advanced toward her, SOI raised her hand and warned them not to come any closer. If they did, she would shoot them. The 3 men laughed, mocking her, wondering what she could possibly do. One of them even joked that she must have escaped from a mental hospital. But SOI suddenly remembered the fairy who had given her a magic book, teaching her some protection spells. One of those spells was called archery. Just the mention of the word made her feel uneasy, but she recalled what the fairy had told her. There was no need to be afraid. The arrows that came from her hands would not harm anyone. They wouldn't kill. Instead, the enemy would be petrified for a moment only. SOI thought to herself that, at the very least, she wouldn't have to cause any lethal damage. Used her magic and shot an arrow toward the trio, but to her shock, blood splattered everywhere. It stained her uniform, covering it in deep red. The man closest to her stood frozen, his face locked in an expression of pure shock, completely motionless. Suddenly, SOI remembered the words of the man with the glasses, the one who warned her that her ability would change upon her return. Even though she had used what was supposed to be a completely harmless attack, the result was horrifying. The man was split in 2, a massive hole torn through his stomach. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. The goon collapsed to the ground, his body severed into 2 halves, completely decimated. The scene flashes back to a few hours earlier. Shen was walking through the crowded streets, wondering why so many people had gathered. And then, he saw his dad. What he saw next shook him to the core. His father was carrying a lifeless body, and Shen immediately recognized who it was. It was the same guy, the one who had the phone strapped to his head. Shen's mind raced. He had just seen this guy on the video streaming platform, and now he was dead? Before he could react, his father noticed him. With a firm but calm voice, he told Shen to wait until everything was cleared. Moments later, an emergency van arrived, lifting the body of the deceased and driving off. Shen's father then approached him, his gaze sharp. "Why are you here?" he asked. "And why did you leave your sister behind?" But Shen remained calm, simply responding that he had wanted to take a short walk. His father studied him for a moment and then sighed. He knew this was the first time Shen had ever seen an actual corpse. As Shen hesitantly nodded, his father began explaining the reality of the hunter world. 4 out of 10 people die while being a hunter, he said. That was last year's mortality rate. 2 out of 10 suffer serious injuries. Some even develop PTSD and never return to hunting again. And these conditions apply to everyone, whether they're a newbie or a veteran. This was the world his father lived in. The question now was, could Shen survive in it? Shen wanted to say yes, but the moment he opened his mouth, he hesitated. He could only manage one word before stopping. This was the limit of his resolve. His father wasn't angry. Instead, he patted Shen on the back, telling him not to be sad. Even having this much resolve is brave of you. The scene shifts to later that night. After a long walk, Shen finally returned to the hospital. He found himself lost in thought, realizing that he had always been like this. Deep down, he had known the truth. He had no abilities. He had refused to face reality. He had spent years trying to gain his father's attention, knowing that he simply wasn't capable. But now, after witnessing the reality of a hunter's world, he wasn't even sure what he wanted anymore. If becoming a hunter was out of the question for him, then what was left? Suddenly, his gaze lifted toward the sky. A figure was floating outside the hospital. A pink aura surrounded them. Shen's breath hitched. It was his sister. What was going on? His eyes darted to her clothes. Blood. She was covered in blood. Panic rose in his chest. Was she hurt? But then, Her face turned toward him, and that's when he saw it. She was trembling. Her entire body shook as her eyes widened with pure fear. Shen barely had time to react before she whispered, "Don't come near me." And then, she screamed, "Don't come any closer." Her entire body radiated energy, pulsating violently, as if she had completely lost control. Before Shen could even process what was happening, another surge of energy exploded from her. The entire hospital wing shook. The building trembled. Everything blurred, then turned to darkness. Time passed. Shen's vision slowly returned. He could barely move. His body ached. He felt something wet. Pain throbbed in his skull. Then he realized his head was split open. Blood trickled down his face as he struggled to regain focus. His body was slammed against a massive tree, and in the distance, he could hear the emergency hospital alarm blaring. A robotic voice echoed through the hospital speakers. "A dangerous being has been detected outside the hospital. All patients and staff are advised to take immediate shelter." Shen clenched his teeth. His vision blurred again. A dangerous being. His heart sank. They were talking about her. They were talking about SOI. The lady was still floating, unable to comprehend what she should do to stop whatever disturbance she was causing. As the hospital instructed everyone not to come outside, Shen called out to his sister, asking if she was unable to control it. He wanted SOI to stop at once, but now, even she didn't know what to do. She started screaming, telling her brother that she did not want to kill anyone, but the more she tried to stop it, the more her power became rampant, lashing out and attacking everyone. The hospital's announcement blared again, informing everyone that the police had been called and urging people to remain calm inside the building. But Shen realized something far worse. SOI was indiscriminately using her abilities in the streets, and that was a crime punishable by immediate execution on sight. His blood ran cold. If he didn't do something now, she would die. But what could he do? His first thought was to alert his father, but then he realized the police were faster than him. Then a horrifying realization struck him. He was the closest one to her. If he didn't act now, no one would. Shen looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling. Could he even do this? With such weak resolve, he knew he couldn't defeat his sister. For a moment, he wanted to run away, to tell himself that this wasn't his fault. But then, he turned around, and in that moment, he saw his younger self, the innocent little boy who admired hunters, the boy who once dreamed of saving others, the boy who believed, no matter what, Shen was having a realization in a life and death situation. Meanwhile, SOI was beginning to hate herself. She didn't want to do this, but her power was out of control. She was wreaking havoc, more destruction, more chaos. Then a scream pierced the air. It was Shen. "Soy, can you hear me?" Even as arrows pierced his body, even as SOI's magic rained down on him, he kept running toward her. Shen didn't understand himself. Why was he doing this? He was scared. He didn't want to risk his life for others, but just because a hunter does it, he wanted to do it too, even when he was injured, bleeding, struggling to breathe. He shouted at his sister, telling her not to panic. Sometimes, abilities run wild because of confusion. If you calm down, things will be okay. So I stared at him, shocked. Why was her scary brother doing all this? Why was he risking his life for her? Because she wasn't human anymore. She was a monster. The scene flashes back to the fairy realm. SOI stood with the fairy who had guided her. The fairy took SOI's hand, looking at her kindly. "You saved our world. You're a hero. Don't be afraid." But SOI's voice trembled. "In the human world, I'm just an adult physically. I have no friends. Now, I'm considered dangerous. I killed someone." Her voice cracked. "Now, everyone hates me." The fairy smiled gently. "That's not true." SOI looked up, uncertain. The fairy whispered, "I've never seen someone risk their life to save a person they hate." SOI's breath caught in her throat. As she opened her eyes, she saw Shen. He was trying to save her, with everything he had, summoning the chains that bound him. He grabbed her hands. The fairy's words echoed in her mind. "Go back to where you belong, so that he can find someone to rely on." And after a long struggle, Shen saved his sister. He collapsed, heavily injured, as the flashing lights of multiple police vehicles surrounded them. SOI sobbed uncontrollably. Yet Shen just hugged her, calmly, quietly, because now he finally realized something. He could do it. He could become a hunter, because now he had resolve. As the police approached, two people stepped out of a separate car. One of them, a man, turned to a lady in glasses. "Did you see the boy's powers just now?" he asked. But the woman remained calm. She simply replied, "I didn't notice." And after that, the incident was resolved by the police, and everything was reported as a small disturbance, so small that it wasn't even mentioned on the news. It became nothing more than a minor, forgettable story. But on the other hand, SOI was now under tight security, almost as if she were in jail. A man approached her cell, informing her that it was visitation time. As 3 guards escorted her to the visiting room, her mind raced. She remembered that after she gained consciousness, her mother had been crying so much that SOI was overwhelmed with guilt. She kept wondering what should she say to her, but as she reached the room, she was surprised. It wasn't her mother waiting inside, it was her father. She sat down, feeling uneasy, not knowing what to say. Before she could even find the right words, her father spoke first. "I'm here to bail you out." SOI blinked. Bail her out? She was confused. Before she could respond, her father continued, "Do you remember the woman your mom brought with her the other day?" SOI paused. Yes, she remembered. It was the same woman who had stepped out of the car that night. Her father explained that the woman was an ability user he had hired. She had a special power, she could read memories. And after reading SOI's memories, the truth came out. Everyone now knew that the men had attacked her first. She had only used force to protect herself, and she hadn't been able to control her powers. By law, it was an extremely justified reaction. She could not be prosecuted. But those were heavy words for a little girl to process. Her father simplified it. "You're being released," he told her, "because you didn't do anything wrong." But SOI wasn't ready to believe it. She looked at her father, her voice shaking. "But someone died because of me." Her father stopped. Then, with a calm expression, he told her the truth. "The person you shot did not die." SOI's eyes widened. "What? How was that possible?" Her father explained. "There are many ability users who can heal serious injuries. He's already received treatment, and he should be fine by now." SOI's entire body relaxed. She didn't kill anyone. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her cheeks flushed red with relief. And then, she started crying. Crying so much, because the burden she had been carrying was finally gone. But as she sobbed in relief, her father sat silently, his mind troubled. Something was bothering him. The scene shifts to outside the facility. The mind reader woman stood, waiting for SOI's father. "Are you done talking?" she asked. He simply nodded. The woman crossed her arms. "We can't cover the damage to the hospital," she told him. "You'll still have to pay a fine." He exhaled. It was a relief that things had ended with only a fine, and it was because of her. He turned to her. "Thank you," he said sincerely, but she waved it off. "No need to thank me," she replied. "After all, we're all in debt to the hunter of hunters. He saved all of us at some point." Still, the woman hesitated. "Will SOI be okay?" she asked. "She'll find out the truth one day." The father fell silent, because she was right. The truth was, the person SOI had attacked had died, and there had been no way to save him, even though he had just lied to his own daughter. He could only hope that, by the time she discovered the real story, she would be stronger, more stable. As SOI was being escorted back for final release formalities, the woman handed her father an envelope. "Take a look at this," she said. As he opened it, his expression darkened, his hands clenched, his eyes burned with fury. "Who sent this pathetic thing to me?" The scene shifts. A man in a headset, lazily munching on snacks, sat watching something. It was Shen, training. Once again, his resolve fully awakened. Using his chains, he grabbed multiple soda cans and crushed them. But as he failed, the man beside him just laughed. Shen scowled, annoyed. "Instructor Lee, who the hell is this guy?" Shen demanded. But even Lee had no idea. "He's been here all day," Lee said, even though his training ticket was cut off. "He's just been sitting around eating snacks instead of training." Shen's eye twitched. He immediately walked over. "Hey, get rid of those snacks. You're distracting me." The man looked at him, amused. "Are you saying your poor performance is because I'm eating snacks?" Shen hesitated. Then, with an embarrassed smile, he agreed. But then, the man's expression changed. The man suddenly became serious, asking Shen if he was going to make this kind of excuse in a real combat scenario. Did he think deadly variables wouldn't occur in a dungeon? If he got bothered by something as minor as rattling and chirping sounds, then he simply lacked training. He wouldn't survive. Hearing the familiarity in the man's voice, Shen suddenly wondered, did this guy know him? Now, Shen felt like fighting him. He clenched his fists. telling the man that he had no idea how much he had practiced to reach this level. But before Shen could even finish his sentence, the man cut him off. "I get everything you're doing," he said casually. "I even acknowledge your physical abilities and your combat sense." Shen's heart skipped a beat. He was being recognized. But then, the man's expression didn't change. "Your proficiency, however, is terrible. You need to work on that." Shen froze. And then, before he could even react, the man was suddenly behind him. Shen's breath caught in his throat. How? He hadn't even noticed him move. The man continued speaking, completely unfazed. "Your chains are made from your own energy," he explained. "That means you have to constantly consume energy just to manipulate them. But you're using too much force in every action." He crossed his arms. "That's why your energy depletes too fast. That's why your chains lack precision." Shen swallowed hard. All professionals in the hunter industry don't waste that much power to control their abilities, the man added. Then, to prove his point, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of crunchy snacks. With a flick of his wrist, he imbued energy into them and threw them. The snacks exploded forward, slamming into the soda cans, blowing all of them away in a single strike. Shen's jaw dropped. Even Li was speechless. Despite being a veteran hunter, he had never seen anything like that. But what shocked Shen the most, the snacks were still intact, not even crumpled. Li narrowed his eyes. "Who the hell is this guy?" But the man ignored the question, turning back to Shen. "You don't even understand your own power," he said. Then, he pulled out a scroll from his pocket. "This is a summoning tool," he told Shen. "It calls forth roars. Bring your chains close to it, I want to test something." Shen hesitated, but as soon as his chains touched the scroll, it glowed. A faint emerald light shimmered around it. The man smirked. "So I was right." Shen stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" The man folded his arms. "Do you remember what happened last night at the hospital?" Shen's breath hitched. The man continued. "I saw it firsthand," he said. "The moment your chains touched your sister, her powers were extinguished." Shen's eyes widened. "In other words, you have an unprecedented ability. Your chains can suppress or return abilities, no matter how strong they are." Shen's heart pounded in his chest. That was his true power. The man leaned in slightly. "That's why just swinging your chains aimlessly isn't real effort. Understanding your true potential and using it correctly, that is what true effort is all about." Shen's mind raced, but now, he had one more question. Who was this man? As if reading his thoughts, the man finally introduced himself. "Name's Young." His lips curled into a grin. "I'm both a hunter and a professor at Shungan's Special Abilities Hunter Academy." Shen's eyes widened. Young continued, folding his arms. "I'm here to recruit you." Shen felt his heart stop. "What?" He stared at the man, unable to believe his ears. But I already took the test," he protested. "I failed." Young shrugged. "Doesn't matter." He smirked. "I have the authority to recommend students for admission. And to me." Young's eyes locked onto Shen's. "Your ability is good enough to pass." Shen's chest tightened. "This time, it's up to you. Are you joining?" The question hit Shen like a tidal wave. And then, his eyes stung. Before he even realized it, tears rolled down his face, because there was only one answer. "Yes," Shen whispered. Then louder, "Yes." Young's grin widened. "Good," he said. He pulled out a document full of important papers and handed them to Shen. "Welcome to the Hunter Academy." Shen's fingers trembled as he took them. But suddenly a dark shape shot toward Young. In an instant, Young's expression changed. Without hesitation, he slashed the object in half. The document split apart, shredded. Shen spun around, alarmed. What was that? And then, he saw him. His father. Furious, his eyes burning with rage. "Explain," he demanded. Shen's eyes burned with intensity. His voice was sharp, demanding to know what Young was scheming. But Young remained calm. "Shouldn't that be my line?" he replied smoothly. The tension between the two men grew thick as their auras surged. Powerful energy radiated from both of them, neither backing down. Shen's voice was firm. "Explain yourself. What kind of nonsense trick is this?" Shen, standing between them, felt frozen. He had never seen his father this furious, but at the same time, Young's aura was also rising. With a smirk, Young casually remarked, "Long time no see, Shen." His tone was mocking, almost playful. "Every time I see you, you've got even more wrinkles." Shen's scowl deepened. Young continued, still in a sarcastic mood, "You should come to the reunions once in a while. Otherwise, people might forget what you look like." But Shen wasn't having it. "Don't change the subject," he snapped. "Tell me what you're scheming." Shen, watching their exchange, blinked. They knew each other? Meanwhile, Young simply shrugged. I sent 2 recommendation letters. His voice was casual, but the weight of his words made the air heavy. One was for SOI. He continued, a RER with an ability comparable to an S rank. And the other. Young's eyes flickered toward Shen. For him, the boy with the unprecedented ability to seal any RERI. Shen's response was immediate. No. His voice was cold, final, unwavering. Young narrowed his eyes. What? Shen crossed his arms. SOI is practically an elementary school student. She can't adjust to an academy like that. That was the final straw. Young's calm snapped. There's no time for her to adjust. He shouted. Her power is going berserk. It's going to erupt again. His voice grew louder. She's a ticking time bomb, and if she doesn't learn to control it properly, she'll take down everyone around her. But Shen stood his ground. I can train her myself, he declared. Young gritted his teeth. You're being stubborn, narrow-minded. His voice lowered. You're only setting her up to fail. Then, his gaze turned toward Shen. And as for him, Shen froze. Are you really going to tell me this boy has no talent whatsoever? Young's voice was filled with conviction. I saw it with my own eyes. He turned to Shen. Your son has more guts than most adults. He threw himself into danger to save his sister. He has the bravery it takes to be a hunter. Shen didn't waver. That's not bravery, he said. His voice was sharp. That's recklessness, and recklessness leads to death. Shen's breath hitched. His father turned to him. Do you even know what your sister's full abilities are? He asked. Did you have a plan when you ran at her? Or did you just act on impulse? Shen opened his mouth, but no words came out, because deep down, he didn't know. He had only known one thing. Without his help, his sister would have died. But his father didn't stop there. You're only focusing on the result, Shen said coldly. You happened to have the ability to stop her, so it worked out. But what if you didn't? The realization hit Shen like a dagger. Are you planning to gamble on luck every time you fight? Shen's voice was firm, because that's the perfect way to end up dead. Shen felt his stomach drop. His father turned back to Young. You're leading him into something he's not ready for. A recommendation doesn't mean special treatment, and even if he goes to the academy, he'll just be left behind, crushed by the competition. Young tensed. His expression darkened. That's a load of bullshit. His voice was low, furious. Our academy nurtures our students. The dean himself wouldn't tolerate hearing such a bad word about it. But Shen didn't care. His expression was blank. Send my regards to your dean, he said flatly. Meanwhile, Shen stood there, his mind completely blank. Why? Why couldn't his father just say, you did a good job? Even once, even something so obvious. If he had just said it, Shen would have had so much confidence. But instead, his father only saw him as a failure. Right now, Shen felt completely alone. No one was supporting him, and with every passing second, his anger grew. But before he could sink deeper into his frustration, Lee suddenly grabbed his hand, congratulating him for being acknowledged by a professor. He told Shen that he was now much closer to his dream than he even realized. However, Shen couldn't see it that way if he wasn't going to the academy. What was the point? But Lee cut off his negative thoughts, telling him not to overthink and to simply walk the path he believed in. His teacher reassured him that, no matter what path he chose, he would always trust in him. Shen had always been chasing acknowledgement, but Lee reminded him that he didn't need it, especially not from people who didn't even know him. At that moment, Shen turned his gaze toward Lee, and his expression darkened. His aura began radiating murderous intent, suffocating and overwhelming, making it clear that he had just realized something important. It was Lee. Lee was the one who had given Shen hope, the hope of becoming a hunter. Even as a hunter himself, Lee struggled under Shen's overwhelming presence. But suddenly, Shen slapped himself, startling both his father and teacher. With a deep breath, he straightened his posture and thanked Lee. That single moment snapped him back to his senses. At first, he had only wanted to be like his father. He wanted to be acknowledged. He wanted to prove himself. But now, he realized those were just pathetic desires. They held no real value. The moment he saved his sister at the hospital, everything changed. At that moment, he knew he wasn't pathetic at all. Now, he was ready. Now, he would become a hunter. And if he had to fight his father to do it, so be it. Shen was shocked by his son's sudden declaration. His expression was unreadable as he muttered that maybe words weren't enough to get through to Shen. For a brief second, Shen thought his father was about to beat him down like in a classic Asian parenting moment. But instead, Shen let out a sigh and agreed. Fine, he said. Give it a shot. See for yourself. Shen was stunned for a moment, but before he could feel any sense of accomplishment, his father warned him not to get his hopes up. Once he reached the Hunter Academy, he would see for himself that the path he had chosen was one he was never meant to walk. But Shen wasn't finished yet. If Shen wanted to continue chasing this dream, he had to meet two conditions. First, he had to get into the student council. If he couldn't do it within a year, that would prove he wasn't capable enough, and Shen would personally drag him back home. Young was stunned, calling the condition ridiculous. The student council consisted of top-class, honor students, and Shen was just an F-ranked first year. It was impossible. But before Young could argue further, Shen shut him down, telling him to stay quiet if he wanted to live. Then came the second condition. Shen had to protect his sister no matter what. Her powers were unstable, and since Shen wouldn't be there to watch over her, it would be Shen's responsibility. If he failed this task too, then he would be dragged home for good. Finally, Shen turned to his son, his expression serious. Can you do it? He asked. Shen, eyes filled with determination, answered without hesitation, I can. His father didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply let go of Shen's collar and turned away. Without another word, he walked off, leaving the three of them standing there in silence. Even Lee seemed surprised. Wait, that's it? He's leaving just like that? Even Young looked like he expected a full-blown fight to break out. I thought I was gonna die, Lee muttered under his breath. As the scene shifted, Shen was walking down the road when Young suddenly called out to him. Oi! Young screamed. You went too far. Running up to him, he glared at the older man. Getting into the student council? That's impossible. He went on to explain that the student council members were all third and fourth years, while Shen was just a first year. Not to mention, Shen was F-ranked. There was no way he could manage that, but Shen didn't care. If Shen wants to be a hunter, then he should at least be able to do that much, he stated flatly. Young clenched his fists. You're expecting too much from him. You're treating him like. He stopped. Shen turned slightly, smirking. Like an Asian parent? Young froze. Shen simply chuckled. Good. Shen called out to Young, turning around and telling him that he had never wanted to drag his own son into the dangerous world of being a hunter. But now that he knew Shen had only ever wanted to be like his father, he realized that, in the end, he had dragged him into it anyway, even when he had never wanted to. As the scene shifts, night falls. Inside the dimly lit room, SOI finally received her letter of admission into Hunter Academy. And with that, February, a month filled with expectations, came to an end. Meanwhile, Shen was training harder than ever, pushing his powers to the limit as he prepared for the challenges ahead. And finally, March arrived, bringing with it a certain change. Shen and SOI now stood side by side at the port. Before them was the Hunter Academy passenger ship. It was finally time to depart, time to step into their new lives. The scene shifts again to a strange, dreamlike space. A boy's voice echoes. Mom, are you lying? He sounds uncertain, because there were still people present. Then, suddenly, a portal appeared. A hunter stepped through it. The boy's eyes widened. He had come to save him. But suddenly, his mother screamed. Hunters shouldn't act like this. Her voice ripped through the air. And with that piercing scream, the dream shattered. A boy jolted awake, drenched in sweat. His breathing was ragged, uneven. His hands shook. Inside the dimly lit dorm room, another student turned toward him. Hey, are you okay? You were groaning in your sleep. A boy with glasses glanced over. Seasick? He asked, adjusting his frames. The white-haired boy sat up, rubbing his temple. No, just a bad sleeping habit. The glasses-wearing student nodded. This is the first time I've seen your face. You must be a new student. He smiled slightly. I'm Ku, a second year. The white-haired boy hesitated, then introduced himself. I'm Soin, newly admitted. The two shook hands, exchanging a brief nod. Let's take care of each other, Ku said. Outside, the ship continued sailing toward Hunter Academy. The scene shifts to Shen and SOI. Both were looking through their bags. SOI frowned, pulling out several knives and strange tools. Why are there so many weapons in here? She asked, confused. Shen smirked. I swiped a few useful tools from Dad's drawer. Thought we could use some good equipment. SOI froze. Dad's gonna be mad. What if he wants them back? Relax, Shen reassured her. He won't even notice. Still, SOI's attention drifted. She glanced out the window, eyes filled with curiosity. I want to go check things out. Shen tensed. Wait, what if you get lost? We should go together. It's room 105. she said confidently. I won't forget it. Shen still wasn't convinced. Soy, seriously, there could be weird people out there. What if someone tries something? So I laughed. If that happens, I'll just call my big brother. Shen sighed, running a hand through his hair. Raising his sister was like raising a child of his own, but deep down, he knew whatever they did from this point on, it would shape their futures. The scene shifts back to the deck. A student stood at the railing, enjoying the cool breeze as birds flew overhead. He inhaled deeply, feeling a sense of excitement. A new school term, he murmured. New encounters, new opportunities. His eyes glinted. If I can make friends with the right students, my life here will be much easier, especially if they're rich and well-connected, because those connections would be useful later. But only a rookie would think that way. His expression darkened. His sharp eyes darted around the deck, scanning the students. Ku and another student glanced at him, confused. What are you saying? The man grinned, turning back to them. You guys should bring a pretty female student next time. Ku blinked. Wait, what? The man stretched his arms. I mean, getting close to new students is good and all, but where are the cute girls? Ku and the other student exchanged awkward glances. The man scoffed. Listen, you two, he said, smirking. If you don't start dating this semester, you're just gonna look like losers. Ku, who had been serious this entire time, felt his soul leave his body. Meanwhile, Ku introduced his friend as Jin, and that was how weird his friend actually was. Soin told Jin that he should just find someone himself instead of asking other people to do it, and Jin told both of them that he had been scouting all this time and was not able to find a beauty. But suddenly, the boy saw Soi, who was making seagulls eat some crunchy, snacky things, but as the birds were not eating, she wondered about why she was being avoided by them. As Soi frantically pulled up a snack, the whole pouch started falling down, and Jin came to her rescue, catching the pouch and giving it back to the girl out of pure innocence and good manners. Soi thanked the boy for catching the packet, but this much was enough to let the boy think that something more could be developed. He started using some cheesy lines, trying to impress the girl, not knowing that mentally she was just a minor. All the cheesy lines were not understood by Soi as she wondered if the man in front of her was just a weirdo, but Jin was not ready to give up, asking Soi if she was a new student and if they were in the same department. Soin, on the other hand, wondered if everything was going well for his new friend, and even when Ku could not see things clearly, he was sure that if the girl was not running away, then it might be going better than the last time. But looking at the girl, Soin realized that even when she wanted to, she could not run away. Suddenly, Soin was curious, asking the man if Jin was really a second year. Ku explained that even though Jin had entered last year, he was the same as Soin. The boy came to know that Jin had failed his grade, and not only him, but there were probably quite a few who had failed in the last batch. Some of them even got expelled and had to pay a hefty tuition fee to re-enroll. Both of them realized one thing, that all the students studying at the academy had a lot of money, because with the Hunter Academy's graduation certificate, they would never have to worry about employment for life. There were even people just going for the degree so that they could make easy money. Soin started thinking that people like that, who just wanted easy money, were not made for the Hunter business, as they always had to follow a real code. He remembered the Hunter who had come to save him with the same book. I guess we all know that the Hunter was none other than Shen's dad. Suddenly, Ku noticed that Jin was going away with the girl he had just met to some place and decided that they should follow him. The scene shifts back to room 105, where Shen was reading some course books while Soi arrived with Jin, telling her brother that some strange person was harassing her. Hearing that, Jin was shocked, while Shen was getting angry. The girl told him that Jin had wanted to know if she already had a boyfriend and that he had suddenly started touching her, even though it was only a handshake. The girl had forgotten the important part. Hearing that, Shen was furious, kicking the boy out of the room and getting ready to trash him into a pulp. But Jin was apologizing to Shen, telling him that they could talk about this. But after hearing what his sister had to say, Shen was not ready to stop, telling him that beating was his only way of talking, knowing that the situation was getting out of hand. Ku stepped between them and told them to stop. He wanted to hear Jin's side of the story. And finally, everything was cleared up. Shen explained to the three of them everything about his sister, and upon learning that Soi was literally just a kid, Ku made Jin apologize to her severely, because he had almost landed himself in jail for that misunderstanding. But Shen also apologized, realizing that he had started hitting without understanding the situation. Ku then realized that Shen was the same age as Soin, and both of them introduced themselves properly. As they started walking together as a group, Ku asked Shen if he was in the hunter department. When the boy agreed, Ku then asked him if he had a hunter he admired. Even though it was not someone in particular, Shen told them that his dad was a hunter, so he had been influenced a bit. Hearing that, Soin suddenly stopped, because Ku asked Shen if he knew the hunter of hunters. And what shocked Soin even more was when Shen said that Shen was none other than his father. Everyone was shocked, telling Shen that they were all huge fans of his father. But Soin could not say anything. He just stared at Shen's face while memories flooded his mind. Realizing that the face of his new friend was the son of the man who had saved his life,